Hola a todos. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us for our Scale Up Getting Early into $1 Million Company. I'm so excited to be here today and introduce to you guys our two really exciting and awesome panelists today. My name is Ilse, and I'm an early stage investor at OVO Fund, which focuses on investing in that first round of institutional capital that a company raises. And so most people call it pre-seed, but essentially I look at super early stage companies. So without further ado, I would like Alex and Kat, our two panelists today, to introduce themselves and just tell me a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do for work.
Cool. Thanks, Ilse. So I'm Alex. My family calls me Ale. I'm a first generation Mexican American. I currently work on the investment team at a venture fund called First Round Capital. I spend most of my time working with folks who are in the absolute early stages of company building, like Ilse. And I think a lot about how we can expand our offerings and increase access to knowledge and resources that'll help more founders build great companies. I started my career in banking, and before this, I worked at a fund called Backstage Capital that focuses solely on funding underrepresented founders. And I also helped build a first round company called Health IQ, which is an insurance company. Outside of work, I'm one of the co-founders of LatinxVCs, which is an organization that helps increase and promote the presence of Latinx investors in venture capital. And I've also helped build the FinTech Today and By Women VCs communities.
Thank you.
Great, and hey everyone, I am Kat Perez, and I am the co-founder and chief product officer of Health Sherpa. And Health Sherpa is a technology platform and a team of people helping folks in the United States find, enroll in, and use health coverage under the Affordable Care Act, formerly known as Obamacare, a hot button topic today. We've enrolled well over 3 million people, so we've been doing this since the very first year healthcare.gov rolled out, and we have grown our team significantly. I joined when we were 7 people. We are at about 60 people currently. In terms of myself personally, I was born and raised in New Jersey. Father's Puerto Rican, mother's Korean. I'm first gen. Very, very large family, Hispanic family in New Jersey and on the East Coast and in Florida, and of course Puerto Rico. Was first in my family to go to and graduate, extended family to go to and graduate college. So I think for me, a lot of the work that I also do at Health Sherpa, apart from products, in the leadership sense, really translates to and maps back to creating an inclusive team and culture, making sure there's representation, and not just on the team collectively, but also in roles of power and decision making. So yeah, that's me. Great to be here. Great to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you. You too. You both are clearly have been very successful in early stage, and as founders, as really successful companies that have gone on to raise venture. It's exciting to have both of you here. So I'd like to start off with the first question as it relates to joining and being co-founders of companies at the start of the journey. What were some of the challenges and opportunities that you faced at that point in your career?
I think challenges, I'll speak to it just briefly, and I'll pass it to Kat. I knew nothing about tech or building a company. I was a lot younger than the team around me. And other than building financial models and writing and art, because I went to art school, I didn't have skills. And so not only did I not know what went into building a tech company, but I also didn't know, how do I even back up that I have a gut feeling that this is the right thing to do? And so that kind of leads into the opportunity side, where I had nothing really to lose. And I didn't know the rules of tech or the process or, how product works with engineering or any of that. And so I just went for it. And so I taught myself new skills. I listened to my gut, and I had the ability to sort of pave the way for myself in a way where, had I known the rules of the game, I might have hesitated a little bit more. But I think I think those two things work together. It was definitely hard, but it was rewarding in the end.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely really cool to see founders from less traditional backgrounds, come into the startup journey.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love what Alex just said because I too have a very untraditional background as well and have found my way in tech. I also went to school for art and design.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And I too, really tried to pick up the skills around me and kind of in my off time. I can't count on one hand. I can count on one hand how many dev workshops and boot camps I've taken just to speak the same language as the engineers and my engineering co-founder. So yeah, so I think for me, the biggest challenge, and I've gotten so much better at this, but the biggest challenge for me was finding a balance, because I am the type of person, and I'm sure you can relate just in terms of how I was brought up, right? It's just like work, 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 work hard, you'll be successful, etc. Which I learned as I've gotten older and navigated through the world, that it's not that simple. But, the work-life balance and really just understanding, what my limits are and the relationships around me and within the company. I think that was something that was clearly difficult for me to navigate early on. And then I think to Alex's point on just, finding product market fit and really just feeling around in the dark and just throwing things at the wall and trying to see what sticks. It's like you don't really know what you're doing, but that's always really challenging, but also just fun if it works out, of course. So I'd say, yeah, those are probably the initial challenges I had. And then of course, in our domain, in our space, the volatility in the market is ever present. It's constantly a talking point in politics. It's highly politicized healthcare in this country. And so I think that will continue to just be a challenge for us. However, the market is the market, and we've done well, and people need healthcare regardless of politics. So, the numbers really speak for themselves.
Yeah, well, maybe we need more art majors to move into.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. PSA for all the art majors out there.
Yeah, for sure. Bringing a new fresh perspective is much needed.
I love it.
Yeah. So then what are some of the more formal structures and processes that you have to build as you were scaling the company, thinking back to, before you guys raised more and more venture?
Kat, you want to take this one?
Okay, I have in my career, I've experienced working at very large companies and then very small ones. I have to say, I myself, I don't know, I guess I consider myself a type A, but I'm very, very adamant about being organized and having some semblance of structure. And I think that was one of the things I learned right away with early stage startups or starting your own company, which is that doesn't really exist for a while. But I'd say, yeah, some of the first things that I did as soon as I joined was I definitely got some meetings set up, at least for the founders, the executive team, that were open and transparent for the company, so anybody could join them. Also, just getting some systems in place to set goals and objectives and align across the company, but also just get teams focused as well. So kind of a designed and set up an objectives and review framework, and one that was fair and equitable and kept as much subjectivity out of the process, although there's always going to be a level of that. I'm not sure anybody's cracked the code there yet on reviews, but that was something that didn't exist. And then the big one, which we'll probably talk about later, is just the hiring process and the value system. Establishing that right away was one of the first big things that I tackled when I joined the company.
Okay. What about you, Alex? Do you have any tips there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can touch on sort of how I went around building things. I think going back to the I didn't have really that many skills coming in. I think one of the biggest things for me was just having to learn systems, like whether this was Salesforce or analytics software or comm systems or whatever it was trying literally everything that I could find and testing it out and seeing how it would work and being able to anticipate what it was that I was going to need 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, 18 months down the line. and like these days, there's just a more efficient way to do everything. And so I think changing the assumption that I needed to do things one-on-one and opening my mind to like, there has got to be a better solution to what I am doing or how this workflow works. I think that was a big shift. I think, you know, Zapier and Salesforce automations were my best friend.
Yeah.
And then I think the third piece was I formalized how I learned from the people around me who were really good at things that I wasn't good at. And like, there's always this trade-off of, you know, should you work on the things that you're great at to be exceptional at, or should you spend some time rounding out the other things? I think, you know, when you build and build and build upon the responsibility and you're just like growing teams and your targets are growing, there isn't time to really suck at some of this stuff. Like you can hire someone who can take over that, but you do actually, like to what Kat was saying earlier, you have to learn the lingo. You have to be able to at least tread water. And so I spent, you know, I had specific one-on-ones on the calendar. If it was getting more in touch with engineering systems, if it was getting, you know, if it was learning analytics better, I was really, really specific about the time that I spent learning from the people around me. So I don't know if that's really a system, but it was a framework that I found really helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, especially as it relates to super early ventures where, you know, sometimes everyone kind of has to take on a little bit of each piece of the business. And especially as a founder, it's really important to know every single piece, right? Because you're likely to be the first salesperson and the first business development person, sort of all across the board. And so moving on from those super early stages of your companies, what was it like in that first point where you experienced sudden growth? And what that
feeling. Okay, so you know that feeling when you have like a few really busy days and you're just like, it's been a week. And then that it's been a week turns into like 2 or 3 of those, and then it just keeps going and it just you don't see an end in sight. Like I think that was like the first sign. And it was like, okay, I need to skill myself, but we also need to hire more people, but we also need to figure out a better way to do this. And then your targets start moving up. And so for me, that was, you know, I oversaw, you know, customer experience, customer success, and our digital sales teams. And for me, that was just the amount of inbound was overwhelming. Like it was comms, it was customer service requests, it was operational challenges, it was everything. And so I found it like, I think it was at the point where like those like, oh my God, this week, like don't stop. And I think that for me was the forcing function, because I had to get to the point where I was like, I'm going to drown if things don't change. And so that's sort of, that was the feeling.
Yeah, it doesn't sound sustainable for a long period of time.
It's not, but it's fun when it starts. I think like the adrenaline from it is fun, like for someone like me who is also type A. I think feeling like you're achieving more every week, and you're just building and you're growing, like it's addictive. But then you do get to a point where you like really do have to be really, really really specific about what you decide to act on from there.
Yeah.
I can totally relate. I mean, I think once I start to see that moment where I start to see my calendar, it's just constantly blue. There's not even a break for lunch. I literally had to start scheduling breaks for lunch for myself. But I think, it's pretty, it happens pretty quickly. It's like, when did that just hit us? And then it just snowballs, to your point. You know, if you're in the fortunate position of your company doing well and having that inbound interest. So yeah, it is, I feel like it just happens, and then you have to kind of react and adjust accordingly. And I think the biggest things that I've learned in that process is, especially when you're early stage and you're wearing all of the hats, starting to, you know, hand off the hats and delegate the hats, or hire the folks to fill those gaps, right? To your point, Alex, people who have the spike, who have the experience, versus spreading yourself thin is a symptom of for sure of growth.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely sounds like a luxury problem, right? When you have that growth.
Yeah, totally.
So what do you think are, looking back at that time, the biggest pain points of that rapid growth that, you know, are pretty ingrained in your heads?
building and trying to make things more efficient while you were also having to scale the things that were working without breaking them.
Yes.
Like as you hire more people and comms and customer experience and operations got increasingly more complicated. Like how do we scale the literal systems? How do we make sure that the experience remained just as special through each and every person that worked with any given customer? Like I'm an insurance, we built an insurance company. So that could be, 10 different people touching one file, throughout a customer journey. How did we make sure that experience was really special? Some of it was systems, some of it was how did we train, but whether it was customer success, whether it was complaints, whether it was experience, whether it was operations, whether it was digital sales, we couldn't break the experience while we tested all of this because we still had targets to hit, and the targets just kept getting higher and they keep getting higher. And so I think the biggest challenge was just figuring out like that, where's the balance between sustaining what's working and what you're doing now and how to replicate how you've been approaching it with all of the new people that also have their hands on these processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can agree with a lot of what Alex just said. There's like, as you start to add more people to the team, there are more and more degrees of communication that you have to kind of manage. And I think that's certainly one of the challenges we've experienced and continue to experience as we grow. And then also with that, just thinking about the business ops versus the people ops and how that all really, they both matter, right? It's easy to say like, well, we don't have a business, but you also don't have a business if you don't have the people, right? So I think finding balance in managing those two as we've grown has certainly been an effort that we are super mindful of, but it's something that's top of mind for us. So yeah, I'd say communication and then balancing both people ops and business ops as you scale is super important.
I think the one thing I'll add,
yeah, go on,
is like on a personal level, like adjusting to change really quickly. Like rapid growth, it challenges even the most adaptable person.
Yeah.
And so getting really, really, I know this is such a cliche like Valley phrase, but getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and just knowing that you're never going to chill. Like it's going to continue going. And so your new normal becomes getting really comfortable knowing you're propelling yourself into every new day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think like for us, one trait we always look for in founders is resiliency, and it relates to being able to adapt and realize that obstacles will come, and we don't expect founders to get everything right the first time. And so just like knowing how they react to that is really important. Yeah. Okay, so I know both of you are pretty big on Twitter and just, your online presence and sort of like putting your knowledge and perspectives out there in the internet. So I'm curious specifically for you, for Kat. I know you've been a big advocate for diversity and inclusion. And so why do you think it's important to prioritize diversity and inclusion as you scale your company? And then maybe also talk about how you thought about this within your current company.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I bring a level of my lived experience to the table that certainly influences my perspective for sure on increasing representation on the team and what that really can do, right? We should hire more art majors. So I think that drives a lot of the work that I do there for the company, and just as I've grown the company. We also fundamentally in the work that we do, we're helping low-income uninsured people, right, find ACA coverage. So if you look at the numbers of folks who are uninsured in the United States, the vast majority of those people are specifically Black, African-American folks or Hispanic Latinx. So those are the bigger portions of folks who are uninsured. So it just fundamentally matters that we have representation on our team and that we have folks who are in positions of management and decision-making on the team that represent the folks that we're serving at the end of the day. So a very specific example of that. I'm our chief product at Health Sherpa, and one of the things that I brought to the table that had not yet been tackled was literally hiring a Spanish speaker to translate the site to Spanish. I mean, really basic stuff. Not use a Google Translate feature, like actually have somebody translate it. And it's just like really small things like that that you can bring to the table if you have folks who have that lived experience, see the world through that lens, right? So other specific examples are being inclusive in the language that we use as we think about the LGBTQ plus community, because I'm also a queer woman, so I'm very mindful of those things. And the LGBTQ plus community experiences a ton of healthcare disparities, right? So I think for me, it's pretty obvious why representation matters. If you think about who needs healthcare in this country, it's everyone. And so if we look like every other company in Silicon Valley, and it's a homogenous group of cis white men, I don't think you're going to get an inclusive experience for something so important. So I think for me, that's really what drove a lot of the work that I've done and continue to do as it relates to building an inclusive space and team, but also really being mindful of how we hire and who we hire.
Yeah, I really like that you said that. I think it's definitely not a charity case, even if some people view it like that, but it's just good business.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say are some tips you have for Latinx professionals or just professionals in general that, have an early stage company and are thinking about how they implement their own diversity and inclusion strategy at their companies?
Yeah. I would say you have to start as soon as you open up shop. That is
point number one, the founder.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you can start, with your first hire, that's amazing, right? You're already way ahead of the game if you can do that. The longer you wait, the trickier it is. I came on as hire number 7. I had the team go through a values workshop. And then after that workshop, we implemented some diversity and inclusion initiatives. We were working with our investor, our social impact investor, Kapor Capital, on these efforts. And it was really difficult. I literally remember being at the Kapor office, like talking to Frida and just like crying because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm getting all of this pushback. It was really intense. But what I found is, even though that's difficult, and I would say, looking back, the advice I would have given myself is like hire an expert to roll this out and help us through this. But as I look back and as we implemented these initiatives and really kind of established our values, what happened as we started to hire and make that into the process and grow is that we started to bring more and more people on who were value aligned, not just with the work that we were doing, but how we wanted to how we viewed the world, how we viewed each other, how we wanted to work together. And those folks with pushback phased themselves out of the company. So I think, this might be an obvious piece of advice, but really, like, the sooner you can start, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so Alex, on your side of things, I know you also care a lot about diversity and inclusion, by the way, but one thing that I wanted to touch on that you've been writing a lot about recently is sort of this focus on scaling empathy as the cornerstone of company building. So can you please just explain a little more what it really means to scale empathy, why it's important, and how one really even goes about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the highest level, I believe that who we are determines what we see and build, and who we invest in and what we invest in. It reflects the kind of community and the world we want to create. And when we're building, our identities shape the problems that we're attuned to seeing. And likewise, it also impacts how we craft solutions. And so when I talk about scaling empathy, I'm talking about scaling consciously more than anything, which is, what are the questions that we ask ourselves along the way, and who do we put around the table? How do we make sure that the systems and the products we build are as accessible and as inclusive as possible? An example for us was thinking about product and customer type. So within insurance, life insurance is a system where when they qualify you, you start at 100 and they just dock you points. And so part of our thesis was, people deserve to be rewarded for all of the health knowledge and the health behavior that they gain along their health journey. And that wasn't reflected in insurance, like in people's insurance rates. And when we were thinking about who our core customer types were, like the obvious person is like, healthy Jane Smith, who's been healthy her whole life. Like that was a really easy customer type to do. But we wanted to look at all the other groups of people where no one had proved that health knowledge and health behaviors actually resulted in a lower rate of early mortality. And so for that was looking at folks who were well managed with chronic conditions. And so we found a big difference in folks with diabetes who managed their A1C really well. And so we were able to create a whole product around that. Folks who were born again health conscious. So maybe someone who had an unfortunate health circumstance early in their life and just wasn't being rewarded for all the work they had done along the way since then. And especially, I think this specifically hit folks who were newly on a health journey. I think, if anyone who has ever focused on their health or tried to start running or tried to eat healthier knows that the beginning is often the hardest, but we really worked to try to find the proof to advocate for all of these different customer types. And so I think when done right, this comes from the top down. Our CEO is incredible at this. Like he truly, he embodies every piece of this mission, and it's something that he reminded us about every day. And so it's incredibly big from company culture when it comes from that point. And then, in thinking of others, thinking of corner cases and outlier cases and questioning, it's the norm. And I know, I was lucky to be on a team where that came from top down. And so even if the focus of a company isn't explicitly empathy or inclusivity, the work also happens in environments where questioning is encouraged and discussion is always welcome. I think that those are the two key pieces that probably every founder it's worth thinking about how you bake that into your culture, because I've never seen an environment where those two things make a company worse. So I think that's how I would sort of tie that back to company culture too.
Okay, yeah, that kind of makes me think of that analogy of, the little kid that is always asking why. Well, in this case, it's actually really important because it can help you uncover other stuff that you previously would have just not noticed to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes it's definitely important to have processes and systems in place as you scale to handle the whys. Even knowing, when's the time to stop and just ship something. What's the process for when someone asks why? How do you gather and discuss it? Who's making decisions? It's very important to be very explicit with sort of what comes after the why. But in general, I'm a big fan of culture where both of those are encouraged.
Yeah. How do you think this focus on empathy can impact the company culture?
I think when done right, it's one of the single most important things you can do, because as a company, the deeper you understand an even broader set of folks, it's a win-win situation. And what Kat was saying, especially within health insurance and life insurance and sort of these financial products that people generally hate to deal with, empathy is a really, really key piece of being able to connect with a customer. And so it's not just the initial connection, it's retaining that connection and it's building trust. And your folks internally, I know you were talking about how the folks who were against the things kind of churned out of the company. I think it ends up building itself. And so you end up with the right people and the people who want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much, Alex. So going back to being a super early stage company, the people that you surround yourself with and the first hires are extremely important, if not as important as the founders. So to the extent that you guys had experience with this at your companies, how did you find and recruit this first employees? And how did you think about the way they fit into the work and office culture back then when maybe you were talking about, employee 1 to 10?
Yeah, I have to say on our side, it was a learning opportunity for sure, especially as the first hires kind of came on. I alluded to this earlier. And some of this came from personal networks, right? Versus actual recruits. But once we did roll out earlier on, once I came on and we rolled out the new hiring framework, some of those initiatives, we started to bake in that value system into our process. We also did something that does not scale, and we more recently kind of removed that component of the framework, but that specific thing was I would literally interview every single person that was coming through, which just does not scale. And that's done. Thank goodness. But I think, you know, having myself and George in particular, CEO, my co-founder, who is an amazing kind of partner on the diversity, difference, inclusion, equity, and belonging initiatives. I think that's, to Alex's point earlier, right? When it comes from the top, when it's something we personally care about and something we personally prioritize for the company, for the team, and bake into our processes, then that's really going to yield results. It's going to yield the results that you want. And for me, I unfortunately had my fair share of toxic tech experiences, along with many others, prior to Health Sherpa, with just like a really bad situation. So I was really, really particular about the team that I joined next. And I also made it clear that, you know, if I was going to be a leader at this company, then I'm absolutely going to have a hand in who we hire and how we do that. So yeah, I think the first hires that happened after we rolled things out, we were still under the 10-person mark, but we baked those values into the hiring process and screened for those alongside skills fit. And that really kind of yielded the results that we needed in terms of folks who are still with us today. So for, you know, over 4 years, folks are hitting their 4-year mark or so. And these are people that are still with us today. So I think folks who are aligned with the values, aligned with the mission, with the work, you know, that's always a good sign, but it really comes down to the processes that you're implementing early on.
Yeah, I think that's a great validation that you guys have done a great job at it. The fact that years and years down the line, employees are still with you in a world where, you know, it sometimes feels like in Silicon Valley, people switch jobs every year. Yeah. So that's definitely a true testament to the work culture that you guys are building. Yeah. Okay, so one other point that I wanted to touch on is this whole nebulous product market fit. And, you know, for me on the venture side, it can feel very different on a per company basis. And to be honest, sometimes there's no one real answer to, like, how do you know you've hit product market fit, especially as it relates to different sectors. But I'm curious for each of you and the type of businesses that you guys have been involved with. How do you know when you have that mythical product market fit? Or maybe like, what are some signals that you're getting there?
Yeah, I think we've both built companies in really hard markets. Like, I can't imagine two harder markets to build in than insurance, both health and life. I think from our end, so like, I don't know how much we were looking for market fit as much as we were looking for customer fit. And so when I joined the founding team, had already done amazing work narrowing in on this group of health conscious people. And they'd done a lot of testing around this messaging. And one of the first things I did was dig into every, what we called affinity group, which was weightlifters, runners, cyclists, you know, walkers, vegetarians, vegan dieters, like any kind of sort of health group. And figure out, one, how to connect with each type of persona, and then two, build those core customer types that I was referring to earlier. And I think what product market felt like for us was when we really felt the resonance of our messaging with how we were acquiring customers. Like, it was the people that came in that were like, I love being a CrossFitter, and so I just want this because I'm joining this community of CrossFitters. And we began to build this community of people who felt something deeper for what we were doing. And it wasn't just a life insurance company. It was sort of this movement. It started propelling into this movement that was like, I bought my life insurance from Health IQ because they understand how much hard work it goes into making sure my family is healthy. And we started to feel it, and it became really obvious which parts of the messaging were important very early on, but also how we handled customer relationships through the whole pipeline. And it just starts to feel right after a while, and you learn where the feedback cycles are. You learn, like, people would be really sad if you're not around anymore. They love doing business with us versus other people, and that became very clear. And so it was sort of this balance between you know, doing enough things that were right to where we were able to start perfecting and oiling the machine better. It wasn't an exact point. It wasn't like the market was like, yeah, we're glad you're here. It was the point where we could breathe, like we could take a breath of fresh air and we're like, okay, like this is working.
Okay. And I know you yourself were, you know, earlier you alluded to one of your affinity groups being Olympic or just weightlifters. And I know you yourself are an Olympic weightlifter. So it must have been pretty cool to be like intimately tied to that community and like their needs and really like what they could get out of Health IQ.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, it came down to even how we train sales teams, right? Like, and the sales teams themselves, like, have like every salesperson has personal experience, whether they're a runner or whether they're a CrossFitter, whether they're a cyclist. And so when everyone inside of the company can speak to the product itself in an incredibly honest way, it like that unlocked something like that. It was just easy because, you know, if I get on the call with, you know, Ramon, and Ramon is a runner and I can talk to him, like, and I know I'm like, what are you running? Like, how did, you know, what training app did you use? What blogs do you follow? Like, let's chat about that. It's just, there was something about building rapport that was just important. And so when we were able to just dive into that even more, I think was the moment where we were like, okay, like this is genuine. This, like, we're really here.
Yeah, especially for being in such a stodgy industry that human to human connection feels even more important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What about you, Kat, in terms of product market fit?
Yeah. So a lot of what Alex says resonates with me. I think for us, I think earlier on before I joined Health Sherpa, it was much smaller. They were in the rental analytics market, and they'd spent a year and a half trying to get 50,000 people to visit their site. And then they spent a day and a half, Ning and George, my co-founders, spent a day and a half building an MVP that is Health Sherpa, the very first year the ACA launched or the very first year healthcare.gov launched. And they were able to get 1.5 million people to the site. So I think that was certainly a moment where at least George and Ning were able to really kind of see that there was something here, there was a need here. And a lot of that really came with the experience and the opportunity that presented itself. Like the ACA, the whole premise was access, right? For folks who otherwise wouldn't have access to coverage that had all these consumer protections. And Health Sherpa effectively is extending that access through accessible experiences and tools and people. So I think that was certainly a moment where it's like, okay, we're onto something. And funny enough, that year I was not with Health Sherpa. I was working for another startup in San Francisco, and I had joined a Salesforce $1 million hackathon, and we effectively built the same thing. At the time, it was called healthcare.love.
You guys won that, right? The hackathon?
Yeah, so we won $1 million, and that's when I did the logical thing. I quit my job and started a company and built more products in health tech. But yeah, that was a moment where we're like, okay, there's obviously a need here, right? There's need to extend more access to people. But apart from the numbers, right? Because I mean, numbers certainly tell a story and their validation for sure. And we had that. We were able to continue to grow year over year. But I think what Alex said really resonates, because I think the experience, and one of the biggest differentiators that we find with folks who end up calling us or using us instead of healthcare.gov is that we just provide a much more authentic and human, real experience. And that's because the people that we hire on our consumer advocate team are folks that come from nonprofit, social work backgrounds or healthcare backgrounds. They're not typical agents, right? Who are cross-selling, upselling, trying to get commissions. Like, that's not how we operate. So I think that's been reflected in our NPS scores. Also, George and myself, we get on the phones during open enrollment. We just get on, and we encourage other team members who are not part of the sport team during OEP to just get on the phones and help people, just to understand exactly who our customers are and who these people are and how different the cases are, because it's just not as simple as, and you know this, right, Alex, it's not as simple as like healthy, you know, cohort over here versus sick cohort. It's actually quite complex and varies in between. And then as you factor in disparities and identity or intersectional identity, it gets even more complicated. So it's amazing when a trans person will call in and ask very specific questions about healthcare and health coverage. And we have a trans person on the other line who's able to answer those questions and knows exactly how to navigate that conversation. That's the really specific thing that's amazing when you think about, okay, we've built something really special here that people certainly need and continue to come back for.
Okay. So as you guys were hitting product market fit, and even beforehand, I'm sure scale was something that was on your mind and the team's mind in general, what would you say was the most difficult part of scaling the business?
Building a life insurance company, like pretty honestly. And I know it's kind of funny to say, but like no matter what, building a life insurance company is hard. Part of it is because of the operational complexity. Part of it is because of the risk. Part of it is because people generally don't trust insurance companies. And a big part of it is around the fact that when you're buying life insurance, you're confronting your own mortality. And people really don't like confronting or being honest about the fact that one day they're going to pass. And so I think this was something we like having this, you know, like even you know, at the company's biggest stage, our CEO is still gets all the inbound emails and reads them, right? Like he still does that. Like a big percent of my time was being in customer inboxes and reading the escalations and figuring out how to talk to people about this in the best way, in a way that felt accessible. And I think that was critical in us being able to scale. But I think that life insurance is generally just really hard. It's something that people purchase a life insurance, they revisit it every like 5 years approximately. And so trying to come into a market where life insurance has never been something that people look forward to buying, a little bit less hard to do, or a little bit like emotionally difficult. So making it easier, I think it was just an uphill battle based on the type of business we were building.
Yeah, I think it's similar with sort of like, I was recently looking at like a whale business and no one knows about that either. So yeah. What about you, Kat?
Yeah, I think for us, it's, and we're growing rapidly now as well, hiring more folks than at a higher rate than we have historically. And I think for us, it really comes back to creating systems that scale. I think we're still at the point where we have to decide when, and I think this is what I struggle with, which is like, when is the right time to, you know, add all of that kind of process to the mix, right, for longer term outcomes, right, versus not a band-aid solution, but something that will get the job done, right, in the near term. So I think that's been difficult as we've grown. So for a very specific example of that is, as we think about the age of our company, and as we think about the folks who have been with us for quite some time and the folks we are bringing on, what do levels look like for each function or role? How do folks, like, how do we carve out a growth path for people? What do the salary bands look like within those levels? So these are things that are coming up now that we have to navigate. And it's like, well, okay, well, do we work on this now or do we work on this later? So I think that's always challenging as you think about some of those components in scaling, and also, you know, thinking about the things that worked versus the potential new markets. We're in a super volatile market, as you folks know. But thinking about, you know, new markets that certainly align with our core values and mission, and how much time and resources to spend on that component versus the core things is always tricky as well. So I think I feel like this is like focus and prioritization is a thing that will follow you no matter what size your company is, but it's certainly a thing that matters significantly when you're smaller or when you're at these kind of growth inflection points. And so yeah, I would say those are probably the things that come to mind for me.
Okay. Yeah, we talk a lot about challenges and obstacles, and that's because the founder journey is really difficult. But what would you say for each of you was the biggest hurdle in your business? Kat, for you today, and Alex, I know you're no longer there, but thinking back of, you know, the many years you did spend there.
Scaling systems and operations, honestly, like making a really, really complicated process more simple, and keeping the human piece in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think for us, it's been a level of working with the federal government, you know, building out those integrations year over year, making those decisions, which in retrospect, thank goodness that we did, because it's what's allowed us to grow at the rate that we've been growing, having that technology, and being able to license that technology out or have other bigger kind of entities use that technology, which really expands our reach. So I think it's, you know, it's navigating that relationship, also navigating the volatility in politics and policy. That's always, even just from morale and kind of motivational perspective, like you have to have those just like real discussions with the team when things like that come up, or even with consumers who call in and are like, oh, is the ACA still a thing? Can I still get health insurance because I'm seeing this on the news, right? So that's always really difficult to navigate, because it does not make our jobs any easier when there's constant confusion out there amongst folks because of what's happening in politics and policy. So yeah, I mean, I would say those are probably the things that are most challenging as we continue to navigate this space. But as I mentioned earlier, you know, healthcare is, you know, nonpartisan. Everybody needs it.
I think you both went after really difficult, and so whatever you do next, wherever you decide to start a company.
I don't think we knew what we were getting into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was difficult and is difficult. What would you say, thinking back about, like, what are some things you wish you knew at the start of your startup journeys, and just lessons you wish you had known back then?
I wish I had paced my energy better, to be honest. Like, just balance, the importance of it. I think I wish I had known once the snowball started rolling uphill, how long I would be pushing the thing uphill. And just figuring out a better way to just balance my life, you know, even just being more efficient in general. I think it would have been really helpful to know that earlier on. I think in terms of things I learned, I guess I might flip the question on its head and say the biggest things I learned. I learned a lot about taking risks and how to figure out which risks are worth taking. And some of that was by doing the wrong thing, and some of that was doing the right thing. But I think that the only way to learn it is by going through it. I learned how to back up my gut feelings. I think that's a big thing. I think when you're new and when you're early, it's like, what is this gut feeling? Like, I don't know anything, but when you're dealing with customers and with product, like, there is some intuitive sense of, you know, where this is coming from. And on that note, like, I learned that when stuck or when in doubt, I always turned to our customers. And I learned that from our CEO. Like, he taught me that from the beginning. And I think that's one of the most valuable lessons I have ever learned, was that, you know, whenever I didn't know what the next decision was, listening and learning to our customers always gave me the right next step. And in that sense, like, I think I learned how to lead in that way too. And I give a huge kudos to our founding team for teaching me how to do that, because I was the youngest by a long shot. But I learned that from them.
Okay. What about you, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, I think echoing some of what Alex said around failing fast, I say, in startup world or in Silicon Valley, but in retrospect, really understanding when it was a good time to test something. And now we just rigorously test everything. But apart from testing and learning, which is actually one of our values, spending as much time talking to our customers too before rolling releases out. So I think there was a lot in retrospect. We're moving a little too quickly, I'd say, too fast. But in retrospect, probably just, good ways to have approached some of those releases and learned from our customers first before rolling some things out. I'd say, let's see, other things that I learned, figuring out when to delegate versus when to own, and understanding the difference and what that represents and what that means. Because I think when you're younger, there is this, at least on my side, and I've seen this in others too, but there's this concept of ownership, and ownership is great, right? That's fantastic, especially if there's great outcomes. But, you have to kind of pick and choose your battles and where your time is most valuable versus, having your name kind of stamped on all of the things, which is not helpful for the company. So I think that's my younger self learns that lesson, and it's a leadership lesson, right? In terms of delegating and filling gaps with folks who know how to do the job way better than you could ever do it.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with
that. I think the best lesson I ever learned, or the biggest moment of just my early career, was the first time I said no to something.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first time I went through my head and I was like, okay, what's on my plate? What's in my priority circles? No, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I think that was probably one of the biggest maturity moments, because I did it consciously in a moment without taking it on and then being overwhelmed or whatever. But I often feel like that's one of the biggest milestones, I think, in early careers, the first time you say no to putting something more on your plate.
Yeah.
That's a good point, especially I think, when you're earlier in your career, you want to say yes to everything, and say no feels like not even an option.
Yeah.
I still struggle with that. I don't know if you do too, Ilse, on the investing side. I'm going through that now. I can't help everyone. And so, how do I do that now? It's something that.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in venture where 99% of the time you're saying no. Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we're a little short on time, so I just have one final question I'd like to ask both of you, and that's really more high level in terms of what advice you have for Latinx professionals at early stage startups who are dealing with, just the process and the journey of being either a founder or an early employee at a super early company.
Kat, you want to take this one? Good. This is your special. You're the best at this.
One thing that you want to leave this audience with.
Know what you're getting into. No, I'm just kidding. I am very happy with my decision and the impact we've made. But I have to say, so I joined Health Sherpa as hire number 7, as chief of product. I've been a former founder, and a year in, George and Ning asked me to join on as a late co-founder, And I have to say, I took time to think about it after my prior experience, because it's intense. It really is. You're constantly thinking about the business. You're responsible for the folks who are part of your team effectively, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot that comes with it, but it's all so worth it when you're building, something that's meaningful, something that, other folks are aligned with you on the mission. When you have folks on the team who join because of the mission, those are the folks who are going to stay with you the longest. They just will. That's where you will not have churn. And you won't have any other kind of issues that come along with folks who aren't aligned with the product or the mission of the company. So I'd say, back to the earlier kind of comments around hiring and being very, very mindful of that process. Even if you're picking your co-founder, that's probably one of the most important decisions you'll make if you need a co-founder. But, making the space and being okay with spending the time and doing that and being thorough about that, because you're effectively in a relationship with your co-founders or your executive team. And that, that relationship, that trust is everything. It really is. And that goes beyond professional, right? It means respecting you personally, understanding your personal battles and lived experience. That really goes such a long way when the difficult conversations come up, because they will, when you're building a company. So yeah, I would say just be mindful of your hiring practice as you think about building a team, and also just understand that it's certainly a commitment, and it's not just a commitment on your end, but it's a commitment as you think about the people that you'll be bringing on and the work that you'll be doing.
Yeah. Similarly to Kat, I came in when the founding team had already been put together and was asked to join the founding team after we sort of went into fintech full force. I think the one thing I would say is, like, when you're joining something, I think maybe I'll do it from an early employee side. Like, when you're joining something, never be afraid to jump into the teams where you just feel this alignment. I think it's like, when we think about, like, at the end of the day, I do this thing where I think about, what are the metrics of my life that I care about? What are the metrics in my work that I'm moving forward, and which ones feel fulfilling and which ones don't? It's a lot easier on good days, on bad days, on terrible days, on the worst days, to stick through and continue just pushing things forward when it's the things that you care about the most. And so I think I would say, like, joining an early team it's a lot of work. And joining a founding team, it's the responsibility is there, but when you relate deeply to the end customer and you are truly there and you truly believe what you are doing, I think it's key. I think that is, like, the thing that keeps you in there day in and day out. And I think the other piece of advice is, if you're early in your career, go for it. Like, take the risk, jump in, even if you, like, summon the courage of a mediocre white male. And, like, I saw that on a tweet the other day, and I was like, this is great, because so often I, like, discredit myself. I'm like, I don't have that track record. There's all these other people who know more than me. If you believe and you are really aligned with a cause, you will figure out a way to get the skills, to answer the question, to figure out what the next step is. And so I would say, like, when you are early in your career, just go for it, because there is nothing to lose and people will feel that energy in you.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And I just want to add one more thing, because that just reminds me of how I even got to this position in the first place. It was going off and starting that company, or my startup, when I won that hackathon money, and failing, right? And going through that experience of starting my own company, building my own products with a co-founder, and it not necessarily making it. But that experience is what led me to connect with Nick and George at Health Sherpa. So I guess the other piece of advice that I would give is, like, don't be afraid to do that, because you really do not know where it could lead, right? What path it's taking you on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow, this has been great, you guys. Thank you so much. You two are amazing ladies, and I'm sure our audience learned so much, as I did, about your insights and your experience. Yeah.
Thanks, Ilse.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kat.
for having us.
Adios.
Alex.
Nos vemos.
Bye, ladies. Nos vemos.
Bye.
Adios.
Adios.